Thank you, Congressman. That was a great way to kick off our day. I now want to introduce you to my colleagues on the stage, Catherine McIntyre-Peters and Tim Clark. We're the program chairs for today's event. So if you love the sessions, I'm happy to take the credit. If you don't like them, these two are to blame. Sorry. Catherine is the executive editor of NextGov, our online publication focused on technology and how it's shaping the future of government. She, in fact, just relaunched the site last week with a whole set of new features and tools and fun stuff. So please check that out and let us know how we're doing. Tim is editor-at-large and longtime leader of Government Executive. I know many of you in the room are already familiar with him because he's been the guru of this conference for more years than he probably wants me to mention. So thank you to Tim and Catherine. The three of us are here to welcome you again and to encourage you to take an active role in today's event. Congressman Van Hollen mentioned creativity and innovation, and that sort of gets at the heart of what we're about today. In fact, our theme is innovation, more mission for the money, and it was inspired by a keynote address by OMB's Shelley Metzenbaum at our conference last fall. All of our keynote speakers and breakout presenters are here to help you develop new ideas for driving performance and achieving your agency's missions in an era when resources will be tight, as the Congressman mentioned, and challenges will only get more complex. But an important part of that whole process today is hearing what you think and giving you the space to collaborate with each other. So we encourage you to do that in the sessions, in the hallways, in the atrium outside, and on Twitter using our hashtag EIGCon if you want to do that. All of this, of course, would not be possible without the support of our underwriters. The elite level underwriters joining us today are McKinsey & Company this morning, Graduate School USA at lunch, and Siemens for the closing session of the day. Thank you to each of them. Now I'd like to introduce John Wilkins, a principal in the Washington office of McKinsey, who is one of the company's leading experts on the cross-sector impacts of converging communications and digital media technologies. And he's also worked at the Federal Communications Commission. He has a few words for us. John?
Thank you, Tim, Tom, and Catherine. And just on behalf of McKinsey & Company here in Washington, all of my colleagues, a lot of whom are here today, just wanted to say thank you to Government Executive for having us here today. And just to start by echoing a few things that the Congressman said, you know, the importance of public service in today's world, it's huge. And I just thought I'd start sharing you one thing from McKinsey. Washington is the home of our global McKinsey Center for Government. And we work with governments around the world, trying to improve performance. And we also step back and look at the impact of government actions on the economy. We've done some research recently in developed countries, so in OECD countries, United States, of course, the leading example. The public sector represents about 40% of GDP. And that's not talked about a lot. You know, we hear a lot about how the performance of, say, manufacturing or the technology sector is so important to American competitiveness. Well, what all of you do, the way the public sector performs, it's important to your agencies, it's important here in Washington, but it's critical to the economy, to the role of the United States in the world. So it's a big deal. Now, the Congressman did a better job than I can of summarizing the constraints that all agencies face today. Budgets are going to go down, not up, and the demands are growing, you know, from your staffs, from stakeholders, and most importantly from the public. And I thought that downward cycle, that risk of the downward cycle that he describes, you know, budgets go down, it can be very, very hard to keep delivering the mission even at the level that it's been before. That can cause loss of morale, it can cause loss of stakeholder support. How do you reverse that cycle? And here at McKinsey, we work a lot with agencies here in Washington, and we know the challenges. I mean, it can feel so daunting under these pressures just to keep the trains running, just to keep delivering at the level that you've been used to. And the real challenge is, how do you do more? And so that's the theme of today, and I'll just wrap up here by introducing a few of the big themes. How do you do more with less? I think in the spirit of the day, why don't we just call it, how do you do better with less? So 3 themes, and they all do fit together. First big theme, measuring and defining performance. We hear a lot about performance management, and how do you think about performance metrics? What does that really mean, especially when you're not talking about a profit and loss kind of environment in the public sector? Well, there's certainly a baseline of performance management that is just about keeping the trains running. I think the challenge today, think about performance management as that key starting point, that it really is the basis for, if you can't define what performance is, you can't define the opportunities, there's no way you're going to rally people around them. So the idea of transparency, what does performance mean in the context of each of your agencies, the missions you're trying to deliver, how does that let you create a real baseline that you can rally support around? The second big theme, innovation. You're going to hear a lot and a lot and a lot about innovation today. And so the essence of it is, you define those opportunities. You say, well, here's what we really could do better. Innovation is all about, well, how do we do it better? Faster, better, cheaper, unleashing that creativity in your organizations. And sometimes that can feel very abstract. Well, gosh, I don't know, is that just about lightning bolts of insight that someone comes up with? And I think the answer is no. There really are approaches, strategies, tactics you can use in your agencies to unlock that innovation. And then the third big theme, it's great to know what the opportunities are. It's great to have some good ideas to try to fix them. But probably most importantly, and sometimes most challengingly in the public sector, is how do you execute? How do you get that change management going, especially given the demands that you face? And that is probably the biggest challenge in the public sector. The demands day to day of the mission are so daunting. How do you do that while also innovating, coming up with new approaches, implementing them, making them work at the scale of your agencies? And that's just the last thing from my experience. Tom shared, I've done a lot in my career at McKinsey, worked with lots of kinds of institutions, and the thing that's just so striking about the public sector in Washington is just how large and complex the agencies that you all run really are. And so these are really at the cutting edge of big management challenges, not just in the public sector, but in the country and in the world. So again, thank you for having us here, and hope the rest of the day is not just interesting kind of think tank type day, but we want this to be a real do tank, if you will. So it's all about going out there, engaging with your colleagues, engaging with all the great material today. And the goal really is to have practical ideas you can take back to the front lines at your agencies starting tomorrow. Okay? So I'm going to go back to Catherine now, and she's going to introduce Danny Werfel from OMB. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I'm Catherine Peters, the editor of NextGov, and I'm especially pleased to introduce our next speaker, Danny Werfel, the federal controller from the Office of Management and Budget. Apparently, federal controller is not a full-time job, though, because Danny's portfolio recently was expanded to include federal procurement, IT, personnel policy, and performance management. So, given all that, we're really glad you could spare some time to come and speak to us today. I don't think there's anyone in the federal government today who better understands the financial and management challenges agency executives face. Innovation has never been more critical for meeting mission requirements than in this fiscally constrained environment, and there's no one better to discuss those challenges and solutions today than Danny. I doubt if Danny remembers this, but in 2007, when I believe he was a deputy controller, I interviewed his boss for a piece on the challenges federal CFOs were then facing. Danny sat in on the interview, but the ground rules set by OMB's public affairs staff were that I couldn't quote him. He was only there to provide information if information was needed. Well, what seemed reasonable at the outset quickly became untenable because Danny was the one who actually had the detailed answers to my questions. So I'm happy to say Danny is on the record today, and he's the controller now. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Danny Werfel.
Thank you, Catherine. I have to admit that there are many days that I wish I was the deputy again and didn't have to go on the record. But I want to thank Catherine and Tom and Tim and the entire team for having me here today. What I'd like to do, and it's one of the difficult things sometimes is trying to capture the essence of what we're facing at OMB and what the federal government is facing in a very brief set of remarks. So I'm going to try something to try to, I'm going to tell a story or a reflection and explain how that symbolizes a lot of where I think we are in the government today, both our challenges and our opportunities. And what I want to do is bring everyone back to February 2009. It's the start of the administration, and the Recovery Act has just been enacted into law. And the Recovery Act, I think history will largely, the debate around the Recovery Act will largely revolve around its macroeconomic impacts. And that's an important debate that will take place. From my vantage point and from many of the frontline workers in the federal government, we had a very different experience surrounding the Recovery Act than the rest of the country, and that was we were presented with an enormously daunting challenge from an implementation and an operation standpoint. This law that came out had just about every ingredient of federal operational challenge. It was an enormous amount of money, an increase in a lot of our activities to distribute funds. We had extreme pressure to distribute them quickly and efficiently in order to get the money flowing into state and local governments and into local economies, because that was one of the underlying purposes of the Recovery Act. But at the same time, while we needed to channel enormous amounts of funding through ordinary channels of operations, we had to do it with limited or no fraud, error, waste, mistakes. And all of this had to happen with the most unprecedented transparency and tracking of every dollar that we had ever been asked to perform. All the while, we had questions streaming in from a whole diverse array of recipients, both grantees, contractors, and individuals. And it was Mount Everest at the time the law was enacted. And the way the government came together and some of the ingredients that came to bear to help us be successful, I think are symbolic for a lot of what we face in future challenges. First of all, it was never more critical for anyone involved to understand how essential the leadership's engagement and the accountability that was being delivered from the president, from the vice president, from cabinet level officials. Everyone involved knew with great clarity that effective implementation of this law was a priority. There was absolutely no debate about it. We had clarity of the priority of the issue. The agencies put senior accountable officials in place that were decision makers within their agencies, that were in had a seat at the table with the secretaries and the deputy secretaries and the highest level of leadership. And that's who was coming to our interagency meetings and our sessions of both brainstorming in terms of how we're going to implement effectively and representing both their agency and putting their government-wide hat and their agency hat in as we took on the challenge. We needed to develop partnerships, unprecedented partnerships and openness with the rest of the federal stakeholders, including grantees and contractors, because we were all in very real time faced with new requirements that we had not seen before, and we're all faced with needing to develop technologies and processes to meet these requirements. And there wasn't time for the federal government to go into a federal building, close the window shades, and work all this out, and then submit stuff for public comment, and then have the public react to it. The deadlines were too quick. And so what happened was we just did it together. And we would have long, sometimes challenging but energizing conference calls and meetings with stakeholders from all over the country, working out each challenge as we uncovered it. And, and ultimately, there were many, many moments of critical implementation success. One of the ones that I talk about mostly, which I think is kind of, for me, the seminal moment or example of how it worked and how it was supposed to work, was this individual citizen goes on recovery.gov, this website that the Recovery Board in partnership with the rest of the government built. And she goes on this website, and if you've seen this website, it's the most full, diverse, multidimensional website of federal spending I think ever created. And the website is very user-friendly in terms of if you're a citizen figuring out where money went in your locale. It has a lot of effective map tools that you can drill down right down to your street level and see locally who received Recovery Act dollars. So she goes on, and by the way, when we were developing recovery.gov, we did a lot of citizen user groups, and the user groups were very clear in their interest in being able to see the impact of the money on their local neighborhood, and that's why you see a lot of map technology in recovery.gov. So she goes on to the tool, and she says, I want to see who's getting Recovery Act money in my neighborhood, and she notices a contract that was issued in her neighborhood, and she's puzzled by it because she's not sure, she didn't think that the entity that she was looking at on this map would receive federal dollars. So she phoned it in. She called a hotline that was specifically set up for this type of issue. And the Recovery Board, who was this oversight entity, was able to look at the issue in the following way. They had this Google Earth-like technology. So they could ask the woman where was the location. They could see it on the map too, except they could use satellite imagery and see what they were looking at. And what they were looking at was a house, a residence on the water in southern Florida who had received a Recovery Act contract. So it's somewhat suspicious. It's not overly suspicious, but it's somewhat suspicious that a residence would list that a corporation would list a residence as its corporate address that's receiving Recovery Act, but not unheard of. And then the Recovery Board, using data and algorithms and forensic technology, was able to quickly ascertain that this same residence was the corporate address for multiple companies that were receiving contracts under the Recovery Act. And now we had the red flag, and now we had the Inspector General and others reviewing and investigating. And I like this story a lot because it has that life cycle of the information was out there for the public to see. They were part of the army of watchdogs across the country that are going to help the government meet its mission more effectively. And they were able to connect into an entity that was able, without ever leaving their chair, without sending an investigator out and going on GovTrip and booking a flight and having to stay in a hotel, using today's technology to learn in real time how to manage the risks associated with the program and how to deploy resources effectively. And in this kind of moment is some of the ingredients of how we need to innovate as a government. And I believe that this is happening across the board and will need to happen more. When the Recovery Act was passed, we all had the sense that there was this new normal that was existing in our daily lives as federal employees, and we had to use the stress of the situation in order to collaborate differently, to innovate differently, and to figure out how to solve a problem in real time on the same infrastructure we'd always been operating on. Well, that challenge seems to come in different waves and different incarnations, but you can really look at the budget challenges that we face today that Congressman Van Hollen spoke about as another such moment in time where the federal government needs to innovate and do things differently, because we are faced with a very dynamic situation. Our mission hasn't changed in terms of its complexity. If anything, our mission grows more important to do the things that that Congressman Van Hollen spoke about, the daily things that the federal government is doing that impact the lives of everyone in America. Security at our airports, food safety, safety on our highways and our mass transit systems, disease control, meeting the medical needs of our veterans, college affordability, infrastructure, whether it be concrete roads or steel bridges or broadband or fiber optics needed to make sure that we are leveraging the information age and we're wired across this country. That's just a touch of the variety of things that we need to do, and we need to do it every day, and we need to grow and be more effective at it. And now, in today's environment, we need to do it on a declining resource base for investments in infrastructure that work in the federal government. And that is something that creates, I think, an opportunity and a challenge similar as we faced in 2009. And I see across government signals and symbols of how we are coming together to innovate in the same way. You know, one of the things that Shelley Metzenbaum spoke about last year when she was here, she mentioned more mission for the money. It starts with defining what your objectives are. For each of the areas that I listed and many, many others, we have a program in place right now where agencies are defining what the goal is. And that goal, from a program standpoint, really defines our bottom line and helps us organize all of our resources around that bottom line. It's, at the end of the day, everyone, whether they're working on at USDA or HHS, whether they're working on deploying a new financial system, or they're in accounts payable, or they're in acquisition, they're all working towards a similar purpose of protecting the nation's food supply, if that happens to be the program that we're talking about. And I think that that is part of what makes being a federal employee so energizing and at points humbling, is that the bottom line that we face is critical to people's lives, to our own lives, obviously, as citizens, but to people's lives around the country. And so we are passionate about it. We have goals that we've set up across the board. We are being transparent about those goals. We need to be monitoring our effectiveness across those. And I think transparency and defining those goals are part of the way in which we can modernize government going forward and help meet these challenges that we have. So one of the things that we've been talking about from at OMB standpoint is kind of what are the key things, how could we kind of bunch up all the different work that we're doing together to meet these challenges of meeting our mission with less. And our work really tends to fall into two categories. On the one hand, it's about a government for the 21st century. It's about doing things differently, whether it's a relentless pursuit of measurement and goal definition, whether it's about transparency in terms of multidimensional elements of transparency for government, whether it's about partnerships with states and local governments and tribal organizations and international countries and all kinds of new partnerships that we're trying to develop to make ourselves smarter and to be more effective. Whether it's technologies that are necessary to improve the way we're served, that citizen government touch point. There is a whole host of things that the administration is working on with the federal family around modernizing government for the 21st century, because to meet these demands, we have to be modernizing. Now, how do you modernize in an environment where the resource base is declining? Well, you've got to be smart and strategic about your investments. And in particular, and this is the other half of the equation, you've got to eliminate unnecessary costs and non-performing investments. And that's what we sometimes refer to as the campaign to cut waste. So think of this as a ledger. On one side, we've got to modernize and invest in new ways of doing business. And on the other side, we've got to tackle the underlying inefficiencies that often exist within our government, whether it's cutting down on improper payments, eliminating expensive or high-risk contracts, managing our real estate more effectively. There are significant opportunities that we see it throughout our entire government operational footprint. There's always opportunities to do things more efficient, to reduce error, to reduce waste. And that's the type that the demand on us to do this has never been higher, because we have to make this formula work. We have to modernize, we have to meet this mission, we have to do so on a declining budget and resource base, as Congressman Van Hollen pointed out to, and to do it, both have to work hand in glove. There's this tension, like there was in the Recovery Act. We've got to get the money out there quickly to stimulate jobs and economic growth in our local economies. But in getting it out there quickly, we need to do it with unprecedented transparency and low amount of error. Well, very similar tension. We have to modernize the way and change our approaches to government to meet our missions more effectively, but the tension is we have to do it on a declining resource base. And it's that type of challenge that I've seen the federal government come and meet before, and I believe that we will meet it again, because challenge really does facilitate and spark collaboration. It sparks and facilitates innovation. It sparks and facilitates partnership. And I see that happening across government. Examples I see every day, and they resonate with me on all these elements. They're growth out of the Recovery Act, lessons learned, and they're what we're doing today to meet our current challenge. Let me give you a few examples. So right now at HHS, in CMS, where they manage Medicare and Medicaid, there is a fraud lab that was set up somewhat recently. And in that fraud lab, they are looking, using data and technology and algorithms and trends, to look across the country for things that don't seem to be exactly right in the way in which we're reimbursing hospitals and providers, and looking for trends and errors. Whether it is the fact that there's an unusual number of procedures, of this type of expensive procedure coming out of this local area. We usually don't see that number of procedures coming out. We need to investigate that. Creating these data networks to be able to trip these things in our systems and say, this is worthy of further investigation. Or something like identity theft, where we might have a fake or false provider who has stolen the medical license of a legitimate provider. How do we catch that? And the reality is that we have growing capacity at HHS and CMS. Some of the record number of fraud busts and investigations are coming out of CMS today, in part because they're raising their game in terms of how they're using technology and data and analytics to stay ahead of the fraud, to stay ahead of the error, and that's a game changer. And that's an example of how we can get more mission for the money. That's a complex one that's not necessarily a no-brainer, but there are no-brainer ones going around all around the government today. People are, for example, video conferencing to save money on travel and networking across our diverse organizational footprint across the country. This is happening. I've been involved in video conferences on a more increasing basis. And it's things like that, knowing when to leverage video conferencing, being smarter about it, thinking differently about these technologies in terms of how we can reach more people and do more networking for less cost is part of the changing way we can manage more effectively. We are using our real estate differently. We are not only closing more field offices, we are canceling the construction of new ones. And how are we doing that? We're rethinking how we use our current footprint for real estate and how we put people in offices and what an office is in the 21st century and how we can leverage telework. These things are happening in real time, and it's enormously exciting to me. We have agencies that are renegotiating leases or moving a few blocks down for cheaper space and holding the market accountable to lower their prices. And 10 or 15 years ago, this was more difficult. Why? Because it was more difficult to move. Today, what we're learning is when people move, they don't show up with boxes and boxes of paper. They show up with a thumb drive and their laptop and a couple of knickknacks, and they're ready to go. And it is reducing moving costs for us. And that enables us some flexibility in terms of thinking about how much per square foot are we paying here. And maybe we can get a better deal. And maybe we can leverage the fact that we're mobile in order to get that better deal and think differently about how we procure real estate. And I mentioned partnership. We're partnering with states. We have programs set up that I'm involved in that are just very exciting. For example, we have a partnership pilot right now with states looking at unemployment insurance. One of the big challenges we have in unemployment insurance is we don't have good information for when people go back to work. And therefore, we continue to pay UI benefits even after they're back to work. It's one of our biggest sources of error in our government is the improper payments associated with unemployment insurance. But we're working with the states. They have access to information about worker status that we don't have, and we have information that can help them. And we've roped in financial institutions as well, who are also helping us understand and essentially triangulate with more accuracy work status so that we can make smarter payments. This is the type of partnership that we were doing in the Recovery Act. We were bringing stakeholders together in new ways to solve particular problems. And so this is an exciting time, I think, to be a federal employee. It's exciting to think about the challenge that we have. I don't want to come to work and have an easy day. You know, I want to come to work. I want to be challenged. I want to believe in what I'm working on, and how can I not believe in more than serving this great country and serving the public and the citizens and trying to build a better life for everyone. This is what we're about, and if that doesn't get you excited, you're in the wrong business. And you're coming here and you're doing it at a time where we really are somewhat embryonic in our leveraging of all the emerging technologies that are out there and new ways of doing business. It's very early in the 21st century. The world is changing and it's very dynamic, and those that are in the federal government today can be a part of this type of evolution as our business seems to be changing every day, and we tend to get more and more productivity and opportunities for productivity. And helping engineer that and being thought leaders and partners in that, it's an enormously exciting time, I think, to be a federal employee. Challenging, very, very challenging, but also rewarding in terms of what we're going to be able to accomplish together. So with that, I really appreciate being here, and thank you very much for having me.